Previously on Murder on Music Row.
You know, I don't believe a lot of stuff that, they say. All I know is what I lived, and all I can tell you is what I lived through my eyes.
You're not fast enough.
There's no way. There's no way I could get
right
into jam that door.
Right.
When I came up on the scene, of course, it was a lot of people out. I pulled right up by the car that Sammy and Kevin were occupying at the time of the shooting. I remember one girl saying, "There's another guy shot."
How could somebody get from the brick wall in between the door and Sammy that fast?
Good question. There's why I thought Sammy may had something to do with it. He was shot. He was shot, but he wasn't killed. For a long time, I thought he set it all up.
Oh, and they all say not guilty, but the evidence will show that murder was committed down on Music Row.
Suddenly, the little song was in the hands of the big stars. George Strait and Alan Jackson, with Tony Brown producing at MCA. They recorded Murder on Music Row and put it on Strait's album, The Latest, Greatest, Straightest Hits. Larry Cordell got a call from a friend.
And he calls me and says, "Cord," he says, "you want to hear your song on George Strait and Alan Jackson?" I'm like, "You kidding me?" And he says, "No, I got it over here." So I leave right then. And he plays it for me.
What did you think first time you heard it?
I thought it was great. I thought we was going to really get paid because it was on the Greatest Hits album.
Let's just say Larry Cordell didn't feel support from the record label.
They're trying every way they can to shut the thing down.
Maybe because that song hit people like Tony Brown, who loved arena guitars and country music, right between the eyes. And all these years later, Tony Brown said he doesn't know why it wasn't a single and a big hit. Cordell sat there and said Tony didn't want to play it on the radio, that Tony put the kibosh on this song.
That's a lie. I would have loved that song. I mean, I didn't have the power to kibosh anything at MC in those days, And I would have loved that. That's right in my wheelhouse.
You know what? That song became the hottest thing in town and out of town. And everywhere there was country music. It was a huge story. Has traditional country music been murdered? Billboard magazine had a story in which they asked artists like Leanne Womack and Craig Morgan and executives like Joe Galante for their opinion of the song's premise. Brad Paisley said country music hadn't been murdered, but it was awaiting execution on death row. TV host Ralph Emery said old-timey songs are the mother's milk of country music, and Mother is out of town.
They would do like an interview with me, and of course I was all militant about it. And I'm not really saying anything more about it. I mean, everybody in the world is calling us. You couldn't buy that kind of publicity.
The song was never released as a single. It was just an album cut, and it ended up at number 38 on the Billboard chart in the year 2000. It was the highest ranked album cut since broadcast data systems started counting 10 years earlier. It wiped out the previous highest ranking album cut. Bellow Wood by Garth Brooks had peaked at number 41. What happened next to Murder on Music Row was country music history. This is Murder on Music Row, an investigative podcast. I'm Keith Sharon. I work for the Tennessean in Nashville. On March 9th, 1989, a young man named Kevin Hughes was shot twice in the head in the middle of Music Row. In August of 2022, my editor handed me a flash drive full of police files, interrogation reports, coroner notes, crime scene photos and drawings, phone records, and internal memos between Nashville police, the FBI, and law enforcement officials in other states. Somewhere along the way, I began to feel like it was our responsibility to tell the story that two bullets stopped Kevin Hughes from telling. This is episode 6, If You Don't Know Me By Now. Friends of Kevin Hughes held a service in his honor at Belmont Church. Barbara Fairchild and Steve Bivens sang I Saw the Light. Joe Henderson, who worked with Kevin at Cashbox Magazine, gave the eulogy. Bill Wentz played the piano. He looked in the audience and noticed one person in particular.
Chuck came in and had a pair of sunglasses on and sat there during the whole funeral.
Chuck Dixon sat in the very last row of the church. On March 25th, 1989, the staff at Cashbox, along with former editor Joe Henderson, collaborated on a tribute to Kevin Hughes in the magazine. Tennessean reporter Angel Latham will read from the tribute.
It is with heavy hearts that we share news about the death of our friend and co-worker, Kevin Wayne Hughes. Kevin was fatally wounded on the night of March 9th by a masked gunman who has not yet been apprehended. His friend and companion at the time of the shooting, Sammy Sadler, was also critically wounded, but is expected to fully recover.
The tribute finished with a line from a song by Max D. Barnes and Vern Gosden.
You don't know about lonely till it's chiseled in stone.
In the spring of 1989, Sammy Sadler had lost his friend. A long surgical scar on his arm was stapled together. He wouldn't be able to play guitar for years. He stopped singing. He was being made to feel like a suspect by lead detective Bill Pridemore and the Nashville police. He got a divorce and moved back to Texas to be close to his parents.
Well, my career was basically over. Again, I feel like how the police have treated me and how they've done me, it put a cloud over me, put a cloud over my head, my career. And to me, it's just not fair. It's not fair to Kevin Hughes. Kevin Hughes died for country music. I took a bullet for it.
The bullet wound had damaged the nerves in his right arm. He had trouble pinching, which is a necessary skill to hold a guitar pick. His arm was swollen, and he was in need of a second surgery. There's an interesting story about Sammy's second surgery. He knew a woman who knew Tennessee's own Al Gore, who was a senator then, and would later become the vice president of the United States under Bill Clinton. There was a brilliant surgeon in New Orleans who had operated on Al Gore's son, Albert. Sammy wanted the surgery done by the best, and Nashville was small enough at the time you could call up a senator, get them on the phone, and ask them a favor. Sammy convinced Gore to connect him with the New Orleans surgeon David Klein. Klein eventually operated on Sammy's arm, and Sammy was able to play the guitar again. So let's go back to 1989, just days after Sammy's first surgery at Vanderbilt. At one point, when he was still in his hospital bed, the phone rang.
My mom answered it, and it was Chuck. And Chuck called in, and I got on the phone, and he's like, crying on the phone to me. He's going, Sammy, I'm so sorry. If you need anything, money, whatever you need, you just tell me. I thought that was very strange for him to do that. And how did he know? They had me in a hospital room under assumed name. How did he know how to call?
Sammy said he was petrified. That's the word he used, petrified. He said he barely knew Chuck Dixon, but the Chuck Dixon he knew scared him intensely. The cops weren't making him feel any better. As one of the focuses of the investigation, Sammy took and passed a lie detector test. Pridemore also took him to Vanderbilt, where he was questioned using unusual methods. But he didn't offer up any new details.
I wanted to be proven one way or the other. It was the whole case all the time. I was thinking he was lying. So I figured if we hypnotize him, maybe we'll get, if it's true, it's true, I just didn't think it was that he was fully committed to the hypnosis. Yeah, he was playing along, but he wasn't in it.
Sammy, of course, said Pridemore was full of shit. The first few months after the shooting were not good to Sammy Sadler. But then, listen to what Kyle Hughes, Kevin's brother, learned about Sammy Sadler's career. He remembers hearing a strange fact from the Nashville police about Sammy's position on the record charts.
They said that his songs were on there more and they were higher than they were after Kevin's murder.
In the 2 years before Kevin's death, Sammy had recorded 6 songs. 3 of them appeared on the Cashbox charts between November 1st, 1986 and March 4th, 1989. The song he called his biggest hit, Tell It Like It Is, dropped off the charts during the week Kevin died. Listen to what Sammy told me about his, quote, last single, unquote, before the shooting stole his career.
Tell It Like It Is was the last single that they had put out on me, and it was my fastest rising single, and they started rushing me in to cut the album, and then tragedy hit us with the Murder on Music Row.
He never got to make that album. He didn't even start playing guitar or singing for almost 2 years. But Tell It Like It Is wasn't his last single that made it to the Cashbox charts. 3 months after Kevin died, a story about a Sammy Sadler song called You Made It Easy appeared in the Cashbox Indie Spotlight. On June 17th, 1989, there's an advertisement at the bottom of the page with a smiling Sammy wearing a long black jacket. The ad says, "Thanks for playing my new single on Evergreen Records, You Made It Easy. National promotion by Johnny Morris and Chuck Dixon." In that edition, Sammy Sadler's song appeared on both the Cashbox Country Singles and Indie Singles charts. He was number 87 on the Country Singles chart, 1 place behind Chris Ledoux, and 3 places behind Mary Chapin Carpenter. Remember, I've found court records and interviewed several people who told me all this was a scam. You pay Chuck Dixon a fee, you buy an ad, and you get on the chart. Sammy said that never happened with his songs. He denied he was part of the scam, but there it was. You Made It Easy on the charts while Sammy's arm wound barely had time to scab over. That song was on the Cashbox charts for 9 straight weeks, reaching as high as number 51 on the big Country Singles chart and as high as number 2 on the Indie Singles chart. On August 12th, Sammy was rewarded with a nomination in the Cashbox Country Indie Awards for Top Male Vocalist of 1989. 4 of the 5 nominees, including Sammy, were promoted by Chuck Dixon. Here's a summary of what had happened after Sammy described his career as, quote, basically over, unquote. He was living in Texas, no longer promoting his own songs, and police treated him like a murder suspect for killing the beloved employee of the magazine, which was now honoring him with a Top Male Vocalist nomination, a magazine that was controlled by Chuck Dixon. Sammy's career appeared, at least in Cashbox magazine, to be taking off. It gets even better, for Sammy, I mean. He had another song, Once in a Lifetime Thing. In his book, A Hit with a Bullet, this hit song didn't get a mention. On October 14th, there was Sammy again in the indie feature picks. The text of the article said, "A great tune by the award-winning duo Jerry Foster and Bill Rice about that love that sometimes does happen once in a lifetime. Johnny Morris's expert production and Sadler's true country style should make this one another hit for Sadler." It's as if nothing else had happened in his life. Once in a Lifetime Thing was on the Cashbox Country Singles chart 5 straight weeks, peaking at number 72, ahead of George Jones, Tanya Tucker, Roy Clark, and Buck Owens. It peaked on the Indie Singles chart at number 11. The last date it was on the charts, November 18th, 1989, was especially sweet for Sammy. He was nominated for Indie Artist of the Year in a category with Razzie Bailey, Marcy Carr, Rich Cheney, Patsy Cole, and Joe Stampley, all promoted by Chuck Dixon. The plaudits didn't stop there. Sammy Sadler was nominated for Indie Single of the Year. What's even more incredible? He didn't even record or release the song he was nominated for, If You Don't Know Me By Now, the old Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes song. His Single of the Year nomination was mentioned in 2 separate issues of Cashbox. I sent Sammy a DM on Facebook in October of 2023 asking about this nomination. He wrote me a message saying he didn't know anything about being nominated. He said he didn't record that song. Again, the question: how could Sammy keep having such a robust year in Cashbox magazine if there was a cloud over his career and he was under suspicion for killing one of the magazine's employees? In case you were wondering, he didn't win the awards he was nominated for. At the risk of sounding insensitive, 1989 was a great year for Sammy Sadler, if you're judging by what you read in Cashbox magazine. How do I know that? Because I'm looking at the December 9th, 1989 edition of Cashbox magazine. There's a picture of a smiling Sammy Sadler. It's a quarter-page advertisement, the biggest ad Sammy has ever appeared in. It says, "Thanks, country radio, for a great year, 1989. The bottom of the advertisement says, "Promotion coordination was done by Craig Morris, who was Chuck Dixon's partner." I'm thinking, who's spending all this money to get Sammy's songs on the corrupt Cashbox charts and to get his advertisements into the magazine? I asked Sammy about the promotion, and he insisted time and time again that neither he nor his parents ever paid a dime. He said Johnny Morris must have paid for everything, but he didn't know for sure who was paying. And we know for a fact, Sammy told me, and he later testified, Sammy's songs never earned a single dollar in return. I wish I could ask Johnny, but he's dead. There's one other note here I thought was important. When I pressed Sammy about his father, Sammy said his father never spent money to enhance Sammy's career, but he did spend money on someone else.
Now, I know my dad, Johnny came to, or asked my dad or talked to my dad about something about doing an album on Roy Clark's band, I believe it was. And I think my dad gave him some money to do a thing on Roy Clark's band, and then I don't know if anything that ever came out of that.
Like an investment.
Yeah.
There was a lot of heat on Sammy's name in Cashbox magazine. And if Chuck Dixon was controlling the Cashbox chart and the advertisements, why would Sammy be highlighted so often? Here's another question. Did the promotion of Sammy Sadler stop in 1989? Nope. It could be argued he had his biggest hit in 1990. On September 1st, 1990, Evergreen released a Sammy Sadler song called Mississippi's Burning Tonight. There is no mention of this song in his book. The song release was accompanied by a quarter-page advertisement in Cashbox. Sammy's wearing a stylish jacket with a floral design on the shoulders. The ad reads, Mississippi's Burning Tonight by Sammy Sadler. Smash! Followed by 2 exclamation points. The song appeared for 9 straight weeks, peaking at number 46 on the country singles chart. Again, this isn't the country indie chart. This is the one with the big timers. His song is ranked ahead of Rodney Crowell, Dwight Yoakam, Keith Whitley and Lori Morgan's duet, and Clint Black. On October 13th, 1990, there's Sammy's picture next to the pictures of Reba McEntire, Sawyer Brown, and Willie Nelson. It's significant to note this smash hit, 18 months after the murder, was a collaboration between Sammy Sadler and writers Jerry Foster, Johnny Morris, and J.B. Detterline Jr. That last name on the list was the birth name of Chuck Dixon. In total, before Kevin's death, Sammy had 29 mentions in Cashbox charts and advertisements over 28 months. After his death, Sammy had 39 mentions, with 3 award nominations in 20 months. I wonder if the death of Kevin Hughes and the investigation that followed would have received more attention in Nashville if Keith Whitley hadn't died 2 months later. Whitley was a country music prodigy, from the same hollers of Eastern Kentucky that produced Ricky Skaggs and Larry Cordell, who co-wrote Murder on Music Row.
So he comes in, a little old skinny kid, you know, he's got these big black glasses on. He starts taking this big guitar out, and I'm thinking, that guy? And dude, that guy starts singing, and it's otherworldly.
Cordell said Whitley got eaten up by the music machine in Nashville. They made him record pop songs, Cordell said. It wasn't until Keith's last living album, Don't Close Your Eyes, with the single I'm No Stranger to the Rain, that Whitley took a traditional country foothold.
Music really started to turn about. There was all kinds of forays into more pop music. If you listen to those songs now, listen to those songs that had been recent hits, well, you'd think they was real country now. But in 1982 and 83 and 84, around in there, they weren't that to me. Lee Greenwood, Gary Morris. I love these people, don't get me wrong. I do. I love their records. I thought they were great. But I was thinking, you know, gee, I don't know if I'm going to have songs like that. It had all the digital keyboards and stuff. He said, have you heard my new record? And I said, no, Keith, I hadn't. And he said, it's what I came here to do. And I just broke my heart, you know, because in my heart, I feel like if Keith would have lived, I think he was the next big thing.
On the morning of May 9th, 1989, Keith was found unresponsive in his bed. His blood alcohol level was 0.47. The coroner said it was equivalent to 20 shots of 100 proof whiskey. His headstone reads, "Forever yours, faithfully." A message from his wife, country singing star Lori Morgan, and also the lyrics of a pop song. Around the time of Keith Whitley's death, Mark Carman took over as the Cashbox Director of Operations. He had been the lead singer of the band Heartland, but he had quit the band and he was now working on the business side of country music. He and I were having a phone conversation one day when the topic turned to Chuck Dixon, who had promoted Heartland Records and worked with Mark when he was at Cashbox.
Most of these people were coming to town, and they would meet up with some other ragtag producer that had some record company that doubled as a body shop or something like that, and then he would be the one to pay Chuck. They would keep Chuck isolated like Mr. Big, like Oz behind the curtain. So they would get their step on the money going to Dixon, too. Usually it wasn't a direct payment to Chuck. Now, it could evolve into that, but most people wouldn't know who Chuck was if somebody didn't introduce you to him.
What was he like?
Okay, I knew him well. Chuck was I say I knew him well, found out a lot of things later that I didn't know. I would describe him the way I knew him, yet I later understood it wasn't that, as a family man. I never detected him to have any kind of musical talent whatsoever, but I understand that, you know, he's a co-writer on, you know, a big song, The Ride, with Gary Gentry and a few other songs. He was friendly, but his persona that he took on was like an old 60s, 70s classic mob guy. Wore the open collar and the jewelry and the big gold nugget bracelets and rings and watches, and he played the role. I never met any of his kids. I heard about them, and I remember meeting his wife one time in the basement of his house where he had his office, but he always talked about his family. You know, he seemed like he was a loving husband and father. And again, we're talking 40 years ago, and I was real young, and so my look on life, my angle to look at life is different. But I looked up to him. I thought he was a good guy. And then as things would roll out as I got older and my eyes became more open and I got more, if you will, educated, gained more knowledge, I look back and I see that, he played me like he played everybody else.
How would you say he played you?
Appealing to my ego as an artist and a songwriter and a guy that aspired to do well in the business end of it. I kind of dropped the aspiration of wanting to be a singer and a writer per se because of him, because he had this philosophy, they're the whores, we're the pimps. And I remember when Keith Whitley died, his world stopped. But the country music business rolled right on. Nashville didn't stop, and he was the same age as me. Nashville didn't slow down. I remember that day, and I remember that thought. And I thought, yesterday he was one of the hottest new acts out there, and today he's on a stainless steel table with a rubber block under his head, and somebody's washing him off with a tire brush and a bucket of soapy water. And the music business didn't bat an eye, other than to try to make money off of it. And I realized that he was exactly right. Like a cow, when they quit giving milk, it's time to butcher them and eat them for hamburger. That's the way he looked at it, and that's the way really I think the whole business did at that time. I mean, his concept was the artists don't count because they're dime a dozen. If this one fails tomorrow, or this one dies tomorrow, or this one goes away tomorrow, there's 10,000 people lined up to come in and take their place. And he was right about that. That was his philosophy, but he was absolutely correct. I mean, I hate that is my assessment of it, but that is my assessment of it.
Mark saw the corruption at Cashbox and quit after 8 months.
It just all seemed helter-skelter to me. I started getting fishy about it, and that's why in December of that same year, when I went to work there and was working with Chuck, it was only from March to December, and I said, that's enough. This is going to a place I don't want to be.
One other thing happened in the weeks after Kevin's death. Chuck's friend, Tony D'Antonio, the guy who had been Kevin Hughes' boss at Cashbox and then became a music promoter, he called himself Tony D, and people thought he was the guy sneaking into the office late at night, changing the Cashbox charts. Sometime shortly after the murder, Tony D left town.
Tony allegedly developed some kind of rare blood disease, some form of leukemia that he could only get the treatment in Mexico. So Tony had to go away. Tony was instantly cut out of Chuck's operation, and instantly that day it was done.
A rare blood disorder? Or was there another business reason for him to be heading to Mexico? I don't know if either is true, but don't worry, I'll have a lot more on Tony D coming up. In January and February of 1990, with the investigation into the murder of Kevin Hughes stalled, Metro Nashville police tried a Hail Mary. They cooperated with 2 television shows, Unsolved Mysteries and Crime Stoppers, asking the public for help. The calls came flooding in after Unsolved Mysteries aired. Callers said Kevin was killed because he refused to participate in a drug smuggling ring. Kevin was killed by a man from Alaska. Kevin was killed by a man from Dixon, Tennessee. 4 of the calls led investigators in different directions with tips about places that sold World War II hats, like the kind that had been found at the crime scene. But 3 of the calls said Kevin was killed because he refused to move songs up on the Cashbox music charts. The Crime Stoppers show only produced 1 call that was noted by the Metro Nashville police. This one said Kevin was killed by the jealous boyfriend of a girl he liked. Police checked out that tip, and the jealous boyfriend had an alibi. There's one more thing about that show, Crime Stoppers. In a little town in Georgia, a notorious drug dealer was also watching. When the show finished, he called the Georgia Bureau of Investigation and became the focus of the police who were looking into the murder on Music Row. That call will be part of an upcoming episode. In 1986, a guy in Tyler, Texas, started a little magazine called Indie Bullet. His name was Roy Hawes. In the late 1980s, Roy worked with a music promoter named Gary Bradshaw. Roy said Gary's clients, who were independent country singers, began appearing in the Indie Bullet charts. Roy said it was completely legitimate. Roy insisted he wasn't involved in chart manipulation. Roy didn't want to be recorded, so I exchanged lots of emails with him. Tennessean reporter Liam Adams is going to read from the Hawes emails.
Somewhere in 1988, Gary Bradshaw came to my office in Tyler, Texas. He was looking for something to do to earn a living. He had a colorful personality, so I trained him as to what to do to be a record promoter. I had a great working relationship with Gary for several years. Anyway, all went well for a few years. Then he wanted to work with Chuck Dixon in an arrangement where Chuck wanted his clients to do well in Indie Bullet, and Gary wanted his clients to do well in Cashbox. Things get really complicated after that.
In 1991, 2 years after the murder, Roy Hawes moved his magazine operation to an office on Music Row in Nashville. A woman named Audrey Medlock came along with him. They opened an office in the Farron Young building, the same building as Cashbox magazine. They found out quickly they had a problem. Chuck Dixon controlled Indie Bullet's rival, Cashbox magazine. Gary Bradshaw, who had been Roy's friend, switched allegiances. He became a partner with Chuck Dixon. At this time, Cashbox was failing, so Chuck and Gary opened a new magazine called Indie Tracker. I know, cleverly close to Indie Bullet. Chuck now controlled 2 magazines in town, the dying Cashbox and the upstart Indie Tracker. Roy's partner, Audrey Medlock, also didn't want to be recorded, but she sent me several emails. I asked Tennessean reporter Kelly Puente to read Audrey's messages.
I met Chuck Dixon in Knoxville at the Independent Country Music Awards show. I traveled from San Antonio with Roy Haas and his wife. I don't recall who put the show on. I just attended. I remember Dixon showing up in a limo with two other men in black suits. The man appeared to be bodyguards. I remember Chuck hanging around Gary Bradshaw and other promoters. I was new to the business and didn't know anyone. Within a group of people, I innocently asked, "What's your name?" Everyone around got quiet. After a long stare, he told me his name, Chuck Dixon. I was later told by Bradshaw that I shouldn't have asked Dixon anything. Everyone knows who he is.
I guess you could say Audrey was intrigued. Roy Haas explained that she left Roy's Indie Bullet magazine and was installed as Indie Tracker's editor. Then she became the mother of Chuck's child. During my research for this podcast, I learned the Dixon family had no idea Chuck's son with Audrey Medlock existed.
I do have one picture of him. I know that he was very he didn't take pictures and stuff like that. I have a Polaroid of him. That's the only picture I have of him.
That's the voice of Blaine Medlock. He shares his first name with his father's middle name, John Blaine Detterline, or Chuck Dixon. Blaine was born in 1992. He currently lives out west. I asked him what his mother told him about his father.
Kind of he was just very mafia kind of guy, always rolled around in limos, wore a lot of gold, was real flashy, wore these expensive suits, and he was just kind of how he carried himself like that. And I do know that things with the underground artists that would come out to Nashville and want to create a career in music and stuff like that. It was from what I've heard, and like I said, this is all a legend, that he was, doing these fake charts and basically getting fake radio plays, having these people convinced that they're on track to becoming successful, music artists and stuff like that.
While I was talking with Blaine, he sent me a copy of a Polaroid. I believe it's his only photo of his father. I've seen old television footage of Chuck talking about Kevin Hughes after the murder, but this photo seems more intimate, more jarring, like I'm not supposed to see it. Suddenly, I'm staring at a man who signed the photo John B. Detterline Jr., February 1st, 1996. He's wearing large brown sunglasses. I can't see his eyes. He's sitting in what looks like a baby boy's bedroom because there's a cartoon Dalmatian, a food bowl, and a bone with sticker dog footprints on the wall in the background. He's wearing a V-neck sweater with a gold chain and a gold bracelet. His hairline has receded, mustache gray, beard white, and his chest hair is gray. He looks neither comfortable nor happy to be there. It looks a bit like a hostage photo, one that could be later shown to prove he had the slightest connection to a child. I try to imagine the secrets in this man's head, the lies, the contradictions, the weight of it all. Is this guy, sitting in front of what could be a diaper-changing table, ruthless enough to squeeze the money out of people who came to Nashville with a dream, ruthless enough to sanction murder? In this photo, he looks thin, maybe just a hint of a belly. But I know as he stares at the camera, he's got just more than 5 years to live. There are people who believe he ordered the hit on Kevin Hughes. The man behind those dark glasses knew the truth. I have spent more than a year trying to find out what he knew. Since I started asking questions, the Dixon family declined to talk to me. I've been in touch with them numerous times, but nothing. They have been in touch with Blaine. He and the Dixon family have talked on the phone several times. They have a cordial phone relationship. Although I haven't seen it directly, Blaine said he shared the results of a DNA test with the Dixon family, which confirmed his father was Chuck Dixon. After Kevin Hughes was murdered, the questions about Chuck Dixon didn't stop. In 1991, Roy Haas was in his office meeting with his close friend, music producer Jason Hawkins, whose label was called Foxfire Records. They were meeting just off Music Row one day when
someone shot a hole in my plate glass window in my office there. He was masked, and fortunately, the thick glass deflected the bullet a bit and didn't hit me. I ducked under the receptionist's desk very quickly. Jason Hawkins ran out of the back door.
After the 1991 shooting, there were death threats, and a bouquet of black roses was delivered to Jason Hawkins' office. Then, on July 17, 1991, Jason Hawkins' receptionist received a heavy package she called the bomb squad. The package was opened to reveal a dead fish. The Tennessean did a big story on the Godfather-inspired Mafia-style shenanigans just off Music Row. Reporter Joe Rogers interviewed Roy and Jason. He wrote, "The picture they present isn't pretty. Charges of chart fixing, telephone threats, break-ins, tapped phones, an interstate highway shootout, and the revived memory of an unsolved 2-year-old murder on Music Row. Can you guess who got arrested? If you said Chuck Dixon, you would be wrong. Audrey Medlock was charged with attempted murder."
I was new in town and had already brought some havoc via my boss, Roy Hawes, who accused me of trying to kill him. The investigation of the gun person who shot out windows on Music Row led to me. I was arrested at my office on Music Row for the attempted murder of Roy Hawes. After several years and thousands of dollars of attorney fees, the case was dropped.
Any guesses who paid for part of her legal fees? Chuck Dixon. Roy Hawes didn't blame Audrey. In 2 years, Chuck Dixon was linked to 2 shootings. He had been questioned, but never arrested or charged. He had not been surveilled or searched. His phone records had not been seized. What'd you think of Chuck Dixon?
He's a scammer. Like I say, by then I thought they all were pieces of,
You can say it.
I just thought they're prey. They're predators. They get these poor innocent kids coming in town, like I told you, and they take all their money and then send them on their way, and not a tear is shed. So I don't like any of them.
And yet, neither Pridemore and the Metro Nashville Police Department nor the Davidson County District Attorney's Office ever filed charges against Chuck Dixon. Even though a witness would come forward, I'll get to that, I promise. The witness would say Chuck Dixon assured him, quote, "I'll get Kevin Hughes handled or he'll be gone," unquote. Pridemore said the police needed direct evidence, like a confession, an eyewitness, or physical evidence to file charges. I talked to Pridemore a lot about Sammy Sadler. We discussed all the facts about Sammy Pridemore had discovered. On the day of the murder, Sammy's the one who told Chuck Dixon that Kevin was dropping 4 radio stations. Sammy was the guy who suggested Kevin Hughes accompany him to Evergreen Records to make a long-distance call. That call, according to phone records, was never made. That spot was where a man would be waiting with a ski mask and a gun. And after Kevin Hughes was gone, Sammy was the guy who had 3 hit songs on Cashbox country music charts, repeated advertisements, and several award nominations. No charges were ever filed against Sammy Sadler.
That's all circumstantial. There's not one bit of evidence in there. There is nothing to say he did it or he was involved in it. That's all speculative. What can you tell a jury? What can you present?
You couldn't take that to a jury.
No. And I'm not an attorney, but I know there's no way that with that I would go to a DA and ask for a warrant. That's enough to make him a suspect, but we already knew he was a suspect.
There was a guy, however, who became more and more interesting to police. He was a guy Chuck Dixon, Sammy Sadler, and Kevin Hughes all knew. As the years passed, this guy managed to stay one step ahead of investigators until long after Bill Pridemore was gone from the murder squad. Next time on Murder on Music Row.
He kept leaving the table to run to the restroom, and we sort of figured out, Bobby Lace and I did later on, that he was doing cocaine.
There were bullet holes in the dining room window that was just replaced like 2.5 years ago. So, and that's on the front end of the house. I don't know, you might dig into that. There might be some more history that you don't know about.
Tony D was doing the chart there for a while, and it started getting more corrupt.
And he just gushed over how wonderful, my demo tape was, and he thought he could really make me a star.
Murder on Music Row was reported, written, and narrated by me, Keith Sharon. The executive producers were Gannett's Vice President of Local News and Tennessean editor Michael Anastasi, and Tennessean News Director Ben Goad. The project editor was Dwayne Gang. The sound editor was Amanda Rossman. Our reporting on the legacy of the Murder on Music Row doesn't end with this podcast. If you've been duped by an unscrupulous promoter in Nashville, we want to hear your story. Please send an email to ksharon@tennessean.com. That's the letter K, SHARON @tennessean.com. Include some details of what happened to you and how you can be reached. Thanks for listening.